4 humans recently returned from the dark side of the moon, but the data they brought back is deeply unsettling. Buried beneath the South Pole Aitken Basin lies a metallic mass weighing over 2 quintillion kilograms. This anomaly is so dense, it is physically dragging the lunar floor downward. When the Artemis II spacecraft flew directly over this exact location, the moon severed all communication with Earth. For 45 agonizing minutes, the crew drifted in total silence, suspended directly above a gravitational monster. Mission Control was completely blind. What those astronauts actually recorded while flying over this ancient buried structure changes everything we thought we knew. In the year 2019, a peer-reviewed study from Baylor University introduced a radical finding that permanently altered established models of lunar geology. Researchers had meticulously analyzed gravitational data transmitted by the Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory, a NASA mission utilizing twin satellites flying in precise formation. These uncrewed probes measured microscopic fluctuations in the lunar gravitational field by constantly monitoring the distance between each other as they orbited. The resulting data revealed an incomprehensible structure. Buried hundreds of kilometers beneath the deeply scarred crust of the South Pole Aitken Basin, located entirely on the far side of the moon, lay a solid metallic mass. Official calculations recorded the weight of this structure at over 2 quintillion kilograms. To put that massive figure into a physical perspective, the anomaly possesses a volume roughly 5 times larger than the Big Island of Hawaii. Planetary scientists theorized it was the dense iron and nickel core of an ancient asteroid, frozen within the lunar mantle after a catastrophic collision over 4 billion years ago. The collision was so violent that the core of the impactor did not shatter, but rather sank and became lodged deep underground. The colossal metal object is so incredibly heavy that it is actively dragging the floor of the lunar basin downward by more than 800 meters, permanently warping the topography of the moon. Following the publication of these precise findings, an illusion of knowledge settled over the broader scientific community. The anomaly was officially catalogued, its coordinates were mapped, and its tremendous gravitational pull was quantified. Because autonomous probes had successfully detected and measured this buried Leviathan from a safe orbital distance, the geological feature was largely treated as a static, dormant relic of the early solar system. High-resolution topographical maps and thermal models provided a comfortable sense of comprehension. The data existed securely in the archives, and the distant structural anomaly seemed fully contained within computer simulations. However, analyzing this historical data creates a profound and unsettling paradox when examining the precise flight path of the recent lunar mission. Human spaceflight is governed by an absolute, unforgiving adherence to risk mitigation. Every single variable, from orbital mechanics to radiation exposure, is rigorously calculated to protect the crew from the lethal vacuum of space. If autonomous satellites, equipped with highly sensitive instruments, already identified and mapped this exact geological structure 7 years ago, what is the logical scientific justification for intentionally routing a crewed spacecraft directly over it? Sending 4 astronauts into deep space merely to passively observe a buried structure that a machine already scanned from orbit completely defies the cautious protocols of modern space exploration. The space agency does not expend billions of dollars and risk human lives simply to replicate a historical satellite scan. There had to be a far more critical, operational objective driving this specific orbital trajectory. The reality of deep space navigation reveals the critical limitations of the data collected in 2019. Uncrewed orbital probes mapped the gravitational anomaly from a high, stable altitude, providing only a generalized outline of the massive gravitational disturbances below. But a generalized outline is entirely insufficient when the ultimate objective of the Artemis program involves landing fragile modules near that exact location. The horrifying truth is knowing a monster exists is very different from stepping into its cage. The old satellites gave us a map, Artemis II was sent to survive the terrain. The Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory mission was an undeniable triumph of orbital mechanics, but its operational parameters were fundamentally restricted by distance. The twin probes operated from a high, stable, and relatively safe altitude. From that elevated vantage point, they successfully identified the presence of the 2 quintillion-kilogram mass beneath the South Pole Aitken Basin. Yet, scanning a deep subterranean structure from hundreds of kilometers above provides only a macro perspective. The older satellites yielded a low-resolution map, essentially painting a blurry picture of the gravitational forces at play. For an autonomous probe whose sole purpose is distant observation, a blurry picture is sufficient. For a crewed landing vehicle attempting to navigate the lunar surface, a blurry picture is a mathematical death sentence. The ultimate objective of the current space program is not merely to orbit the Moon, but to place human boots back on its surface during the upcoming Artemis III mission. Landing a fragile, incredibly heavy spacecraft on a jagged, unlit lunar landscape demands unprecedented precision. When a lunar lander begins its powered descent, the onboard computers must calculate thrust, velocity, and altitude down to the exact meter. Because the Moon possesses zero atmospheric drag to slow a falling vehicle, gravity is the absolute dictator of the descent rate. To survive the landing sequence, the flight computers must possess a flawless, high-resolution map of the localized gravitational field. This is where the buried Leviathan presents a lethal physical threat. The colossal metallic anomaly does not generate a smooth, uniform gravitational pull. Instead, its immense density creates severe mass concentrations, scientifically known as mascons. These mascons act as invisible gravitational sinkholes scattered across the orbital path. The gravitational field above the South Pole Aitken Basin is highly uneven, filled with invisible peaks and valleys of pulling force. If a descending spacecraft relies on the blurry, low-resolution data from the older satellites, its altimeters and automated braking thrusters will miscalculate the required thrust. An error of just a few percent in the gravitational data would cause the lander to accelerate when it should be decelerating. In the vacuum of space, that slight miscalculation guarantees the module will shatter against the towering cliff walls of the lunar craters. Because of this physical reality, the recent lunar flyby was fundamentally misunderstood by the general public. The Orion spacecraft was not sent on a passive sightseeing tour around the far side of the Moon. Instead, the vehicle and its 4 human occupants were transformed into a living scanner. To obtain the precise, high-definition gravitational data required for future landings, a heavy crewed spacecraft had to physically enter the danger zone. The flight path of Artemis II was deliberately designed to route the capsule at a critically low orbit, intentionally plunging the vehicle straight through the invisible gravitational disturbances generated by the massive anomaly. The engineers stationed at Mission Control on Earth required empirical, real-world data. They needed to observe exactly how a modern spacecraft behaves when it encounters a severe lunar mass concentration. As the Orion capsule flew over the anomaly, its highly advanced internal navigation systems, specifically its inertial measurement units, were constantly recording physical data. The objective was to measure exactly how many feet the spacecraft was physically yanked off its projected course by the sudden uneven spikes in gravity. By recording the exact physical displacement of the heavy capsule as it was pulled by the buried metal, scientists could map the invisible minefield with the exact meter precision required to keep the next crew alive. They were testing the terrain by allowing the terrain to pull on the ship itself. While the invisible gravitational sinkholes pose an immediate mechanical threat to the trajectory of any descending spacecraft, the colossal metallic anomaly buried beneath the far side of the Moon harbors a second, far more insidious danger. The 2 quintillion-kilogram structure is not merely a heavy rock. Planetary scientists theorize it is an ancient iron and nickel core of a massive impactor. When an immense concentration of dense, conductive metal is exposed to the extreme environment of deep space, It interacts with its surroundings in a terrifying and highly volatile manner. To understand the severity of this threat, one must first examine the fundamental vulnerability of the lunar environment. Earth is enveloped by a powerful global magnetic field, a protective shield that actively deflects the constant, deadly bombardment of the solar wind and high-energy cosmic rays. The Moon possesses no such global magnetosphere. Its surface is completely naked, utterly exposed to the unrelenting fury of deep space radiation. For billions of years, intense solar flares and highly charged particles from coronal mass ejections have been violently slamming into the lunar crust without any atmospheric or magnetic resistance. When this relentless stream of charged particles impacts standard lunar dust, the radiation is absorbed or scattered in a relatively predictable pattern. However, the presence of the massive iron and nickel anomaly fundamentally alters this physical dynamic. When high-energy solar radiation and galactic cosmic rays strike the specific region containing this buried metallic leviathan, the physics of the interaction change dramatically. The dense metallic composition can cause incoming cosmic rays to shatter upon impact, initiating a severe cascading nuclear reaction. This phenomenon, known as spallation, releases a concentrated geyser of secondary radiation. It creates a highly localized radiation anomaly, a turbulent, invisible storm of charged particles and highly energized neutrons erupting upward from the basin floor. Previous uncrewed orbital probes and autonomous satellites were entirely incapable of accurately assessing the true biological threat posed by this secondary radiation. A robotic satellite can easily count the raw flux of radioactive particles passing through its external sensors, but a machine cannot measure the physiological degradation of living cellular structures. Furthermore, the electronic shielding utilized on small, lightweight probes is vastly different from the complex, interconnected life support systems required for a heavy crewed landing module. NASA realized that mathematical estimates and historical satellite data were dangerously insufficient for planning a long-duration human surface mission. This glaring gap in critical survival data dictated the secondary, unpublicized objective of the Artemis II mission. The space agency needed to send actual human beings, living biological tissue, directly through the specific, highly irradiated zone. As the Orion spacecraft flew at a critically low altitude over the South Pole Aitken Basin, it acted as a heavily monitored biological testbed. The interior of the capsule was packed with cutting-edge radiation sensors, specifically calibrated dosimeters, and the living bodies of the 4 crew members themselves. The engineers operating mission control needed to know exactly how much of this localized secondary radiation could penetrate the protective hull of the Orion capsule. They required empirical data to understand whether the metal mass below was actively emitting a concentrated field of radiation capable of frying the delicate, mission-critical electronics of a descending lander. Even a momentary electronic failure or a computer reboot caused by a radiation strike during the final phases of a lunar descent would result in an immediate and fatal crash. More importantly, the agency needed to calculate the precise biological toll on human DNA. When the future crew of Artemis III eventually touches down in this exact region, they will not remain safely enclosed behind the thick hull of a heavy orbital spacecraft. They will be stepping out directly onto the lunar surface, protected from the void only by the thin layers of their extravehicular spacesuits. If the buried anomaly is generating a severe, localized radiation hotspot, the secondary particles could easily penetrate those suits, tearing through the cellular walls of the astronauts and irreparably destroying their DNA. The Artemis II crew was deliberately flown through this invisible fire to determine if the intended landing site for Artemis III is merely a dangerous geological crater or a highly radioactive death trap that will silently execute anyone who dares to walk upon it. As the Orion spacecraft crossed the lunar terminator and slipped behind the far side of the Moon, the most harrowing phase of the Artemis II mission commenced. This was the precise moment where all the theoretical physics, historical warnings, and remote satellite data converged into a terrifying physical reality. The spacecraft was not merely orbiting, it was descending directly into the belly of the beast. As the massive bulk of the lunar sphere positioned itself exactly between the spacecraft and Earth, an absolute and unbreakable physical barrier was formed. The thousands of kilometers of solid rock, combined with the dense 2 quintillion kilogram metallic anomaly, entirely obstructed all radio frequencies. In an instant, the telemetry data streaming to mission control in Houston abruptly ceased. The reassuring voices of the flight directors vanished into a hiss of static, followed by complete and utter silence. For 45 agonizing minutes, a total radio blackout consumed the mission. The 4 astronauts were now completely severed from humanity. There was no remote assistance available, no supercomputers on Earth to verify their orbital trajectory, and no emergency override protocols that mission control could trigger. They were locked inside a fragile shell of titanium and aluminum, drifting silently above the most dangerous and violently warped gravitational terrain in the solar system. The isolation was profound, but the environment outside the pressurized hull was anything but peaceful. As the spacecraft passed directly over the South Pole Aitken Basin, the physical reality of the buried Leviathan made itself known. The invisible gravitational minefield immediately took hold of the Orion capsule. The extreme mass concentrations, the deeply buried mascons generated by the metal core, began to physically drag the spacecraft. Onboard navigational computers, completely isolated from external tracking networks, recorded the terrifying environmental data. The ship was being yanked and pulled by invisible forces, constantly deviating from a smooth, predictable orbital curve. The internal inertial measurement units worked frantically to log the erratic trajectory shifts, recording exactly how many feet the capsule was being dragged toward the jagged, unlit surface below. The crew could not hear the vacuum of space, but the structural integrity of their vehicle was actively battling the crushing, uneven pull of a prehistoric metal giant. Simultaneously, the advanced radiation dosimeters lining the interior of the cabin began to register the secondary threats. As they flew directly through the localized radiation anomaly, the invisible storm of charged particles and high-energy neutrons bombarded the outer thermal protection system. The dead silence of the severed radio communications stood in stark, terrifying contrast to the absolute chaos of quantum physics exploding just millimeters outside the spacecraft. The astronauts were suspended in a quiet, dimly lit cabin, yet their instrument panels flashed with the data of an active, highly irradiated hazard zone. Massive amounts of telemetry were being written to the onboard solid-state drives, capturing the exact biological and electronic toll of the environment. This was the ultimate execution of the living scanner protocol. A delicate machine, built by terrestrial hands, was drifting in total darkness directly above a 2 quintillion kilogram metallic monster that actively defied planetary physics. During those 45 minutes, the crew was utterly disconnected, relying entirely on the raw engineering of their vessel to survive the invisible fire and the erratic gravitational sinkholes. They were charting the deadliest region of the moon, enduring the extreme forces of the lunar far side, while completely blinded from the rest of the universe. As the Orion spacecraft endured the violent gravitational pulls and severe radiation spikes during its 45 minutes of total radio silence, the true, ultimate motive of the lunar mission was finally executed. The public narrative often assumes that the space agency is primarily interested in studying the 2 quintillion kilogram metallic anomaly itself. However, that massive buried structure is not the objective. It is a terrifying obstacle. What the Artemis II mission was really after is hidden right at the jagged edges of the beast. The underlying purpose of the entire orbital trajectory was to locate and map a highly specific geological boundary. The colossal prehistoric impact that drove the dense iron and nickel core deep into the lunar mantle also violently sculpted the sprawling South Pole Aitken Basin. Along the heavily bombarded rim of this vast depression exist some of the deepest, most ancient craters in the solar system. Because the rotational axis of the moon has an extremely slight tilt relative to the sun, The bottoms of these deep polar craters are cast in eternal darkness. These areas are scientifically classified as permanently shadowed regions. Without a single ray of sunlight reaching their floors for billions of years, these abysses act as perfect thermal traps. Planetary scientists know that locked within the freezing, sunless regolith of these craters are millions of tons of pristine water ice. Older, uncrewed satellites had previously scanned these polar regions from high, safe orbits. However, those autonomous probes could only provide educated estimations. They relied on measuring neutron reflections and analyzing radar backscatter to infer the presence of hydrogen, operating under the assumption that high hydrogen concentrations indicated frozen water. But an assumption from a high-altitude satellite is a catastrophic foundation for establishing a multi-billion-dollar human surface base. To safely commit to building a permanent lunar outpost during the upcoming Artemis II mission, scientists required absolute, undeniable chemical confirmation of the resources on the ground. This is the exact reason the Artemis II module was deliberately flown through the perilous blackout zone at a critically low altitude. While completely severed from Earth, navigating the deadly mass concentrations, the Orion spacecraft was utilizing its state-of-the-art sensory equipment. The vehicle carried highly advanced optical and infrared spectrometers. By flying directly over the basin, Orion acted as a close-range reconnaissance platform, actively scanning the unlit crater floors. The modern instruments were specifically designed to analyze the exact molecular signature of the surface regolith, allowing scientists to map the precise location, purity, and density of the ice deposits without relying on distant guesswork. The entire endeavor comes down to mapping the contact point. The engineers and scientists at Mission Control must find the exact geological boundary line where the terrifying gravitational and radioactive influence of the buried metal mass ends, and the stable, resource-rich ice fields begin. This is the deadly border of lunar exploration. If a future landing module attempts to touch down too close to the anomaly, the erratic gravity generated by the mascons will pull it into a fatal crash, or the localized secondary radiation will destroy its delicate life support systems. Conversely, if the spacecraft lands too far away to ensure total safety, the crew will be unable to physically reach and harvest the ice. The space agency desperately needs the precise geographic coordinates of this razor-thin margin of survival. Understanding this boundary is a matter of absolute cosmic dominance. In the harsh economics of deep space travel, water is the ultimate currency. It is not merely required for human consumption and agricultural life support. Through the chemical process of electrolysis, water ice can be split into its base elements, liquid oxygen, and liquid hydrogen. These are the exact chemical components of highly explosive rocket propellant. The permanently shadowed craters surrounding the anomaly are not just a geological curiosity. They form a dormant cosmic gas station. The terrifying truth is that the nation or agency that successfully maps this exact contact point will secure the ability to safely extract those resources. By obtaining the exact coordinates where the danger ends and the fuel begins, they will effectively command the greatest interplanetary refueling station in the solar system, holding the master key to human expansion into the deeper cosmos. As the 45 minutes of absolute silence finally concluded, the Orion spacecraft broke the lunar horizon, emerging from the isolating shadow of the far side. The moment the vehicle re-established its direct line of sight with Earth, the terrifying radio blackout abruptly ended. Instantly, the severed communication link was restored, and gigabytes of heavily encrypted telemetry flooded the servers at Mission Control in Houston. The crew transmitted precise navigational deviations, localized radiation logs, and high-resolution spectral scans of the permanently shadowed craters. This raw, hard-won information was not merely a mechanical record of their survival. It was the definitive key necessary to unlock an entirely new era of interplanetary expansion. This perilous orbital maneuver permanently alters our perception of the celestial bodies around us. Deep space is not a barren, empty playground waiting peacefully for human arrival. It is a profoundly unforgiving and harsh territory, entirely shaped by ancient, cataclysmic forces that defy human comprehension. The desolate lunar surface we observe from Earth is merely a thin, quiet veil draped over the violent, chaotic history of the early solar system. The universe does not hand over its secrets easily. The Artemis II crew did not just fly around the moon. They mapped the invisible scars of an ancient apocalypse. They proved that, to survive the future, we must navigate the buried horrors of the past. As we analyze the data they brought back from the dark, one question remains: are we truly ready for what Artemis III will unearth? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If this glimpse into the cosmic shadows changed how you see the night sky, leave your thoughts below. Subscribe to Space Theory as we continue to decode the terrifying and beautiful mysteries of our universe. Keep looking up